I'm gonna kind of jump back and forth with this. If I want to know what everybody's favorite sport is, would it be a good idea to go stand outside of the whatever football stadium is being held when the Super Bowl happens and ask people what their favorite sport is? Why? So the result I would get would have what occur more? I would have football more, right? So I would have football more than what?
Everything else.
But that's not, yes, more than everything else probably. But there's not a number that means like too much. So you're saying it's more than what? If I want to know what everybody's favorite sport is, let's say I would expect 30% of people to say football, which goes up this year. If I went to the Super Bowl, I'd probably get like 90, right? So the number that we found was higher than the actual number that it should be. Does that make sense? Which would be an overestimation. If I went to the Super Bowl and asked people if they loved a ballet, I would probably get a number lower than the actual population number. So that would be an underestimate. So the question being asked depends on the context, but there's an over and underestimate that really matters. Beside a bias, systematically it favors certain outcomes. Yes. Now, this next part is me kind of being specific because people don't understand to do this. When I ask you, what does yours say? When asked about what type of bias? What does yours say? When asked about which type of bias, you need 3 parts. So the first thing is, you're going to need a vocab word, which is your specific type of bias. Which we haven't talked about what those are yet. So I don't have a vocab word for the football scenario yet, but this is the word I would pick here. The justification of the bias type selected so like in that scenario, well, people who are in a football game, people are paying that much to go to a football game, probably really love football, which is different than the overall population, so that group is different, that kind of thing. And then the third is what I was talking about. Is it an overestimate or underestimate? So you need to know, like, your justification goes like more people are there than, or more people who are there like football, higher percentage of people who are already there like football than the typical population. So it'd be an overestimate of percentage of football as their favorite. Alright, so types of sampling, or types of bias, we have sampling bias and non-sampling bias. Sampling bias is quite literally an issue in how I acquired my sample. First one is convenience sample. I don't think you really need to write anything beside that. If I asked you guys, go survey 20 people and ask them this question and bring back your results tomorrow, most of you are probably going to go ask what? Who? Your friends. Well, what do your, especially in high school, what do your friends have? Similar opinions, and probably similar opinions to you. So, would it be biased if you only ask your friends a certain type of question? Yes, because they're going to systematically favor a certain outcome. Even if it were something like, we're going to get into this in a lot more detail, but if I had to do something with like animals, and I describe the closest ones to me, like if you're in this giant field and there are these really fast animals or something, and I get the closest ones to me, they're probably close to me for a reason. The ones who are quicker or faster or whatever are probably not close to you. So convenience applies in a bunch of scenarios, but it's still the same thing you would think it is. All right, voluntary response. Most of you probably think you're fine with what that one is, but this one gets mixed up a lot with some of the other ones. So what is something that you think of as a voluntary response?
Like the survey to ask how like employees did.
A survey to ask how employees did. So let's get a little bit more specific than that. Think about like at a restaurant, and they want to know how the waitress did. Where is that survey going to be? Like, is somebody going to walk up to you and be like, here's your survey. So how am I going to fill out that survey? So like there's a link on the receipt, right? So when I leave, have they written down she's part of our sample, she's not? So when do I become part of the sample? When I choose to be. So I volunteer to participate in that survey. I was never picked. I have to literally go out there and volunteer myself to be a part of it. So individuals choose themselves, and you need to think about it that literally. Individuals choose themselves to be included in the sample. So what are some other examples of that? Like, it's out there, here's how you get to it, decide to do it or not decide to do it. What are some other examples?
When apps ask you to rate it, you can either say.
When apps ask you to rate it, it pops up and says, click here to be part of the sample or be part of the survey. What's another one? So, like, there's a lot that's online that can be, it like shows up and it's like, here, click on this to be part of the survey. Anywhere where they say, call in, dial this number if it's yes, and dial this number if you feel no. But you have to choose to call in. That's another example. I'm gonna come back to this one in a second. Under coverage. That would be. And remember, all these are types of sampling bias, which means it is quite literally an issue with the way I obtain my sample. So it's definitely an issue with the way I obtain my sample. If I have no part in making them join the sample, it's up to them. A voluntary response. Under coverage. So if your coverage area is not full, not everybody likes, well, we can think about like a phone map. If they always show the maps of this brand coverage area, there are parts that aren't shaded, right? Which means those people don't get a chance to use their service, right? That's essentially what under coverage is. So if I want this big group, but for some reason these groups have no chance of ever being part of it, then that's under coverage. It just makes the exact same sense of the map. If people in this white part over here that's not shaded they have no chance of ever using my service. That is under coverage. So something like a phone survey or their random digit dialing service, who is gonna be left out of ever being part of that survey? So if I use a random digit dialing service, what? People that don't have phones. People that don't have phones never have a chance of being part of my survey, so that is under coverage. Anything like that. So certain individuals are left out of the process of potentially being part of the sample. If you want to word that differently, you can. A city's trying to figure out low-income housing, and they have a survey that is an online survey to determine how much online or affordable housing is required or needed. Well, only people who can get online and people who can do the survey. That's really going to mess up your results if you're doing something like low-income housing. So it can very easily become a big issue, more so than just like a couple people might not get a chance. So these are all sampling bias because these are issues with the way I collected my sample, quite literally. So non-sampling bias, or non-sampling bias just means there's bias that's not from literally the way I selected my sample. So first one is non-response, or non-response bias. Sometimes it says non-response bias, sometimes it says non-response, sometimes it says non-response error, but it's all non-response. This is one of the main places where people get mixed up between voluntary response and non-response. This big important thing about voluntary response is I choose to be in the sample. So they never wrote down my name and said she's part of our sample, and then I didn't do anything. Non-response means I was personally selected. For some reason, they could write my name down and be like, this person was part of the sample, and me say no. If they come up to you like at the malls and say, here, use this new hand lotion or whatever, and you say no, you were part of that sample, you chose not to participate. That is non-response. Even if they call you, they can write down your number, this number was called, you say, no, I'm not going to help you, or you're going to hang up on them, that's non-response. You were part of the sample, you chose not to respond. So once chosen, refuses to or cannot respond. Back when there was a thing called a landline, and the phone actually rang at your house, and they call you in the middle of the day and you're at work, that counts as non-response. Your number was called, you did not respond. Two questions. One, if somebody walks up to you and says, do you support the Humane Society? Exact same question. Are you a heartless individual who cares nothing about life, or do you support the Humane Society? I'm asking the same question, right? But am I probably going to get different responses? Now, was that kind of an extreme example? Yes. But this is wording bias. Honestly, the more classes I take that deal with wording bias, the harder it is for me to give y'all surveys. because there's so much psychology behind actually wording bias. Even to the point where if I say, ask something about, how do you feel like you are doing in this class, or do you think you can do better? Something about like, do you think you can do better in this class, or rate yourself between where you should be and how you are doing, and just ask you that. That's one thing. Or I could say, what are your grades? What did you get on the last test? How many hours did you study? How often do you do your homework? Now rate yourself of how you're doing in the class versus where you could be and where you should be. If I've just come off of what's your test grade, how much did you study, how much homework have you not done, now you've kind of changed your perspective going into that. So things that you don't notice end up affecting things a lot. So wording bias doesn't just have to be like obvious me telling you which way to go. It can even be just the order that I ask the questions that can change your answers. So it leads the answer in a certain direction. Alright, so non-response bias. I was chosen, and for some reason I either refused to or could not respond. Whereas response bias means I did respond, but there's something bad about the way I responded, or how I responded, or why I responded. A very obvious example, if somebody walks up to you and says, does this make me look fat? You're probably going to do what? Well, it depends on who it is. Probably say no, right? Does that mean that you were telling the truth? But are you less likely to tell that person to their face if you think yes, right? That's essentially the whole idea behind this. But it can be dealt with like politics. If somebody's running for office and they come up to you and say, hey, who'd you just vote for? Mm-hmm. You're probably not going to be like, not you. You're probably just like, oh yeah, I voted for you, and then walk on and nothing changes, so it doesn't make you feel bad. So I always just write response bias as lying. But that encompasses a lot. The one of the Trump elections, a lot of people were lying and saying they didn't vote for him because they didn't want to be associated with that when they actually had voted for him and stuff like that. So for some reason, you choose to give a different answer than what the truth is, given all circumstances. So I'm encompassing a whole lot by just saying the word lying there. I don't love writing this right now. With sample size, if I only pick 3 people and one of them gives me some crazy answer off the walls for some reason, is my data going to be very good? But if I pick 300, am I probably going to get some that are bad answers? But is my data going to be a little bit better? So all I want to do right there is address the fact that typically the larger the sample size, the more accurate the results. The only reason I don't love writing it with this one is if I go to the Super Bowl and ask people what their favorite sport is, does it matter if I ask 1,000 people or 30 people? No. Like, bias is going to stay biased regardless of how many you ask. So that's the only reason I don't want to really write anything there. But I kind of wanted to just bring it up at the time. All right, so we're going to switch gears